A new report has cast doubt on a major element of the federal government's climate change scheme. The Centre for Independent Studies has examined how the proposed Clean Energy Finance Corporation will work. It argues the creation of the new body is a waste of money because it's trying to be grant-giving and commercially focused at the same time, and that emissions trading will cancel out any positive effects anyway. Oliver Marc Hartwich is the author of that report, and he joins us now. Oliver, exactly how is it meant to work? $10 billion. What does the corporation do with it?
Well, the corporation is supposed to sponsor renewable energies, try to develop some clean energies, green energies, renewable energies. And the problem with that is that that was supposed to happen under an emissions trading scheme, because we already limit the total amount of carbon emissions in the economy. So whatever you do on top of that actually yields a zero effect. And that comes at a price tag of $10 billion.
Why does it yield a zero effect? Why can't you have the market mechanism in carbon trading working, then you tilt the playing field as well and favour some types of industries to help you along the way? Why can't they both work?
Because that really doesn't go together, and there's enough experience in other countries, particularly in Europe, where they've been trying this for 10 years. And in Germany, for example, since 2000, they had feed-in tariffs for renewable energies, so that's costing the Germans about $15 billion a year now. But simultaneously, the European Union has an emissions trading scheme, and therefore the two actually don't really work together. They cancel each other out, and the German government's advisors have consistently said that they should actually scrap the feed-in tariffs because they're costing $15 billion every year, and they have a zero impact on carbon emissions. And actually, the Australian government is doing exactly the same. So we're subsidizing renewable energies when the total amount of emissions is already predetermined by the ETS.
Well, let's focus more on the German example, because you go into that in some depth. Where did the Germans target the money? At one stage they said they wanted to be the solar country of the world, essentially. Is that where it all went, or what happened to the money?
Yeah, they're getting there because they're sponsoring, they're subsidizing their solar industry like mad. But really, they're not having an impact on carbon emissions. You can subsidize solar, fine, but don't have an emissions trading scheme on top of that, because you're really cancelling out the effect. What the Germans are doing is really, first they say how much carbon is emitted in the whole economy, and afterwards they're subsidizing the energies that actually deliver this. But as German government advisory bodies, like the Advisory Council to the Economics Ministry and the Monopoly Commission, a German equivalent to the Productivity Commission, have repeatedly said, you really should give up one of these policies, because together they don't work. And we are really repeating the German mistakes.
I can understand how it might send them broke, might cost a lot of money, but why doesn't it have a net effect in reducing emissions? I mean, if every house was to have solar power and there was adequate sun, why wouldn't it in any case have a net benefit?
Quite simply because an emissions trading scheme is also known as a cap and trade scheme, but cap means you cap it. So you actually put a limit on the total amount of carbon emissions. So once that's done, that's determined. You can't do anything about it anymore, so you can't actually drive down the emissions because you have really set it in stone. You've written it down, and that's it. And that's what the economy is going to emit, regardless of what you do afterwards. So you can spend a lot of money without having a really visible effect. You're having a zero effect at a cost of $10 billion.
Isn't there a broader problem, though, with these types of financing arrangements? I mean, if somebody's got a very good idea for innovation, they go out to the marketplace, they attract capital, investors go, there's a lot of money to be made off that, say, for instance, with an emissions trading scheme driving some change in the economy, if it was to successfully do that, and they tip their money into it. Normally you only ever go to the government to get finance if something's a loser and you can't get it from the private sector. And there's also the issue, of course, of timing, which means, and strings attached with anything that comes from, any finance that comes from money. Isn't that a structural flaw with the idea of having a CEFC, let alone the problems you've raised?
I think you're exactly correct. I mean, that's of course what happens in the system. I think there is actually only one justification for having the Clean Energy Finance Corporation on top of the emissions trading scheme, because it provides nice photo opportunities. Politicians can visit these places, they can visit the new solar plants, and they can say, okay, this is what we built. Whereas if you're just employing an ETS scheme, of course, the ETS scheme, the trading scheme, actually delivers all the carbon emissions reductions by itself, with no politician doing anything.
It's hard to be photographed in front of a cap and trade scheme.
Exactly.
Or flicking a light switch off. We did that.
So, I mean, the scheme is expensive. It starts next year, I think. The first $2 billion tranche flows. What sort of projects do you think will get green-lighted straight away, and are they going to be, as Tim said, the losers of the litter?
We're probably going to get all the projects that you already see in Germany. We will probably get some windmills, we'll get some solar schemes, I mean, insulation schemes, whatever, but the major problem remains. The dilemma is always, you can do all these things, wonderful, but you're not saving any carbon emissions. And I think really to spend $10 billion without saving a single gram of carbon dioxide is simply bad economics.
if, for example, it was only used as seed funding to get these industries going or as joint venture funding, wouldn't that have some positive result?
Yeah, potentially, but the problem remains. I mean, you still have a predetermined level of carbon dioxide emissions in the whole economy. So what I'm really saying is the government, if they want to have a climate change policy, fine, but at least make it inherently consistent. And you haven't got a consistent policy because you really have to make a tough decision. Do you want an ETS? Fine, but then go with it and don't subsidize anything else. Or don't you want to have an ETS? Fine too. Go and subsidize stuff directly, but don't do two things at the same time because you're really doubling up and you're cancelling out the benefits.
Have you looked at the experience also in the United States? I know you mentioned Germany, of the cylinder example where hundreds of millions of dollars were provided by the federal government. I think it was about half $500 million to Cylinder, and then end up going bankrupt, and essentially public money has been lost for no purpose.
I didn't look specifically into this example, but I mean it's a common story that's happening in a number of markets around the world. I mean the German government, of course, subsidized some renewable energy schemes, and they had exactly the same problems, and now some companies are struggling. Especially they're struggling now because the German government is actually trying to cut these solar subsidies by 30%. So that's going to be an interesting experience for them.
Well, it's an experience that we may be joining in from 2013 as the first $2 billion starts rolling out. Oliver Marc Hartwich, thank you very much for joining us today. And that is all for The Drum today. Thanks very much to the rest of the panel too, to John Barron, Cassandra Wilkinson and Tim Wilson. And you can check out the website at abc.net.au/The Drum. Join us again same time tomorrow. See you then. Good night.